So episode 2, what should be prioritized when creating multi-channel campaigns? And my first query is really about what's your preferred approach between multi-channel and omnichannel? We hear a lot about these buzzwords at conferences. I mean, there were some last week in Barcelona, but really, what is your rationale for choosing specific channels over others? Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sabine. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And as said, so I think that, everyone has been, working in marketing for a long time. We've been doing multi-channel because we are doing different tactics. We're just not connecting them, and we're doing often one shot. So which means that you're sending some different pieces. Then did they succeed or not? You're continuing or not, you're not continuing. So I think in the past, this was kind of the old perspective. In the meantime, I was also doing a lot of cross-channel, which means that some of them are actually connected. And I think that for today, the only option is really to have omni-channel, to say that when you're doing different tactics, which ones you actually prefer to choose, you need to connect them. So when I was using my different, in the different launch stages I have been doing, it's really to have a backbone of the communications to say, whenever everyone is moving, where do you actually post the content afterwards? So there should be a post hub. Is it a website? What is your preferred option? But it has to be a kind of backbone in the communications where your different pieces are driving to. So if you're sending out a Viva approved email, if you have e-blast and so on, the idea is really to say that you're connecting all those pieces together. So you're linking them actually to the website afterwards. And it's also where you can get all the collective insight and impact afterwards. So I think that from my perspective, multi-channel is an old version. And I think we really need to have, if you cannot do full omni-channel, you need to do cross-channels. You need to link some of them at least, because otherwise you will never be able to measure the impact.
So typically, you mentioned email, you mentioned having a web hub. What other channels would you have typically used over the years in your launches?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I think that what is the objective of your communication? Is it reach, to have a higher reach, or is it actually to have a frequency? So you have some of the two assets and tactics and so on that are very good into light engagement. You're going to have some banners, you're going to have some e-blasts, you're going to have blast invitations as well, which means that you're going to have a broad group of physicians that you're connecting to. But then on the other hand as well, you're going to have a deep engagements where you're going to have some video mechanism of action, for example. You're going to have some KOL engagement. So those pieces as well are much deeper engagement. You also can link it to social media, and you're going to have a higher impact. For sure, your audience group is going to be much more targeted, but you're going to have a higher impact. So I think a little bit depending on it. So from my experience, what I did is that from the global perspective, I have been doing reach a lot. So which means that when you come to a product launch, you need to reach out to physicians. You need to use banners. You need to use third-party media and social media as well to make sure that you have a very broad reach. Locally, we went on very targeted communication with the deep engagement in that case. So you're going to have to really target communication on your target group. Okay. So I think that the approach is different. Yeah.
But yeah, I think what you're saying is essentially it depends on the level of depth that you want to communicate. And then certain channels, such as maybe an HCP app, would lend themselves better to deeper communication, the right mechanism of action, whereas the more awareness type level or even attention catching level is actually effectively served by social media. This leads on very nicely onto my second question, which is about what would be the most important ingredients when you orchestrate your rare disease product launch, because rare diseases is actually quite a unique space, but it teaches a lot of rigor for people who are also in other more common disease areas. So if you had to choose one ingredient, which one would that be?
So I think align on an editorial planning. What do you want to say? What is actually the content you want to use and so on? So I think that what you want to say over the time. And I think also that sometimes in companies and so on, they see like omnichannel strategy kind of like a separate piece, but it has to be built in the brand plan. And that should really be pieces as well. What do we communicate over the year? What are the different pieces of studies and so on that are actually being published, and how can we build them in the plan? And I would say when it comes to the editorial planning, I'm not only talking about a marketing planning when it comes to communication or commercial planning, but it's also about the medical, because you have the same target group. So you need also to have the consistency. If you communicate from medical, if you communicate from marketing, I mean, the physicians will only in the end see that the company is communicating. But in the rare diseases, what is particular is actually that you also have the patient, which is much more informed about the treatment. So you need to be aligned as well with the patient communication that you have. So at the same time you communicate to the HCPs, you also need to make sure that you do it to the patients, because the patient might come in and ask for a treatment, or, you know, they need to have this consistency. So I think that this is really particular in rare diseases, to have this kind of consistent alignment from the global level, building in the plan, and then making also the execution when it comes to the local steps.
So in terms of your top tips for planning from global to local, I mean, do you have a particular sequence of events that need to be followed?
So I think I actually have kind of, you know, a couple of top ingredients in that case. I think that, you know, when it comes to, it's really to align from the global perspective as well, legal and compliance, because they're going to be supporting you whenever you need to push it forward to regulatory locally. And I know as well that in my experience, I had a lot of discussions with legal and compliance from the global perspective. Can we do it? What does it say on the benchmarking? And then they are supporting you the communication also locally with the regulatory. So you don't come to a barrier afterwards where you say that, you know, the regulatory, well, we cannot do it locally because this and this, but they are really supporting your project. And I think in this task force, you also need to have the medical team as well aligned to make sure that, you know, you have this kind of consistency. So I think that this is kind of one of the top ingredients. This is you starting, then you have your editorial planning as well. And I think also the success locally is also to have the affiliates early on in the process to make sure that there is a buy-in and they understand where you actually want to go.
So you seem to say that you need every piece in the jigsaw to feel an element of ownership for that launch. And I completely can echo what you're saying on the MLR alignment, because this is something we always do when we plan and orchestrate a digital content campaign. We ensure that we have the buy-in from MLR, because if you don't do that, you know that there's going to be further delays down the line. And we've successfully done that by inviting them at the kickoff meeting typically. So this is very familiar indeed.
Yeah, and they are not blocking you later on in the process as well, because sometimes you want to do something very innovative and different, but then later on in the process you get blocked because you didn't do it, you know, take all those discussions up front and kind of figure out, are we really aligned? Is this, you know, the company policy and so on? So I would really say that you save a lot of money and time bringing them on the process early.
So this really segues very naturally into the next question about the backbone of your project. In order to successfully launch an omnichannel campaign, you essentially need to do an element of change management. So what has been your experience in implementing that change management? It's not an easy task when you know that pharmaceutical companies typically are highly siloed organizations. And when they move to the digital era, a lot has to be changed. So tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a long journey. So I think that you need to understand that it takes time to do change management as well. And one other thing as well that we did it in an early stage, it was to see what is the status quo, where do we actually stay currently? And I think when it comes to an omnichannel approach, but also about internal capabilities as well and so on, you need to be honest and have this kind of state, where do we stand? And what is our vision afterwards? Where do we want to go? And I think you need to understand that there is a kind of step-to-step approach, because you cannot say that you go from almost nothing to completely omnichannel approach, but there is a kind of stepwise approach. How do we do it it along the journey. And I think also bringing them on this journey with the change management, you need to align the stakeholders. You need to make sure as well that you have people from the top management supporting your omnichannel transformation as well, because they're going to be your key stakeholders in the projects to make sure that when you have some barriers and so on, they will support you on pushing. So I think that this is really, making it forward. So I would say that the first piece is really, where do we stand? What are the internal different systems we have? What is the CRM system? What we're actually bringing in the CRM system? What are the analytics we do? Are we actually measuring KPIs? Because then you can see what is the vision, kind of short-term vision, and what is the long-term vision. And then for sure, you're getting to a piece where you have execution and activations. These are really where we're building out the tactical plan. What are the different tactics we are using and so on? How do we do the pushing? And in the end, you need to measure it. How do we measure the impact? What are the different KPIs that we are pulling together? And this is why it's so important to have the omnichannel approach. We are connecting the different pieces. So just for one example, it's that, when you do the change management, that actually start also from the sales rep, that whenever they go in and see a physicians, you have the sales ad, that they are presenting. Is it connected with the CRM system that you show what is the different pieces? How can you measure the content? And then afterwards that you have a Viva Prova, it's sent afterwards. And then this one has to have a call to actions. Where is the call to action? Is it on a hub where you can post more content or somewhere else? So you're really looping around it, that you do the 360 communication. So I think that this is really the change management you need to bring over the time. And then for sure, execution KPIs. And along the journey, you need also to have the affiliate that they are buying in, because omnichannel approach is not about the global doing something, but it's about the whole organization really going in. And I think that closing the loop is also with the sales reps.
So does it suggest that potentially it's important to have a single clear message for every single omnichannel campaign? Because I can imagine that if you have too many messages, the waters is going to get a bit muddled and people are going to lose track. I mean, how did you manage that in particular?
Yeah, so I think that this is really good learning as well, is to work like campaigns that, everyone wants to say everything at once, but it doesn't work like that. And I think that in the past we did Viva Proof emails as well, which was very, very content heavy. And we didn't really have the kind of, click-through rate and so on as expected. So we were having a lot of discussions as well with the affiliate to try to understand how we can improve it. And it was like to have, shorter messages, modular content, which is much more easier, and say that, over a period of time that you say January, February, March, this is the kind of campaign. And then switching over to April, May, June, you change the campaign. So you will really have the content. And I think that content is not about changing the subject of an email, but it's really to change the content, in it. What is the message you want to pass by? Because you're going to see when they're clicking through, some of them are going to be much more clicked, and some of the other ones will be having less interest. And this will also give you insight. How do I improve the content?
So there's a very iterative aspect to planning these campaigns, it seems. How much were you able to evergreen some of the content, the most successful content, and how much did you have to create novel content to, position the story on a different level as you go deeper into the conversation? Because essentially part of the campaign objective is to bring the healthcare professional from one level of knowledge to a more in-depth level of knowledge, presumably. So
yeah.
How much can be reused? Because we're entering an era where people are being a bit more scarce with their resources, and maybe there's a few tricks to be learned on the iterative side of the campaigns.
But I think that sometimes we want to say a little bit too much at the start. And I think also in the rare diseases, you also need to have a lot of disease awareness. So which means that we were working actually on the two aspects that we had on the product line, and then also on the disease awareness. So which means that you're actually linking both of them. And when it comes to disease awareness, this is something as well that you can go, for example, on third-party media, as well as social media, that you do the educational part. And then when you have a little bit more targeted communication, that, those are physicians eventually prescribe subscribers and so on. You can go a little bit much deeper into scientific data and so on into that, and also trials. So I would say that, you need to sequence it in a good way and not say everything at once. There need to be a storytelling that, what is the nice story you want to hear over the time that you actually want to continue to listening. And I think that how can you connect the dots that, on one piece that you're sending something in a Viva approved email, but then you can have a physician as well talking on a video that is on the hub as well. So you're connecting it together, that this storytelling is starting on one point and then you're continuing on the website. And then there is eventually, you can have a congress. What you actually say at the congress, how do you build that in as well? Because you're inviting them to the symposium and the storytelling and continuing. So I would say that you have this consistency. Eventually, if you're using pillars, that your core story is built in different pillars. So then you can use it and talk by them piece by pieces. So you can really build in the storytelling.
Okay,
I think also...
That makes sense a lot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about the reuse? How much can you reuse from maybe the disease awareness part of the campaign?
So, from the global level, so I was producing all the material as well. And I think from the local, the reuse, we try to have close to 80-90% of the reuse locally afterwards. But I think that the idea is really to build up a consistent plan, but also see the new evidence generation that is coming out. How can you actually build those different pieces in to say that this is one of the pillars in my core story that I already talked about, but what are the new evidence really supporting it? So you can kind of layer it in all the time. So I would say that modular content is really good, short and snappy, which much more impact as well, that you're implementing adding in your core story to supporting it.
And would you say this is probably the main tactic for scaling the multi-channel rollout? Because essentially you already know what the stories you want to tell. And then as the evidence surfaces from the literature, you have an opportunity to grasp it and share it to serve your overall purpose. Is that the secret to scalability? Because, there's an essential aspect to omnichannel, multi-channel, is that you need to communicate quite a lot and quite consistently and repeatedly. So you need a certain amount of content to be able to scale. I mean, how do you see this? Is there a particular way you can scale?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question as well, because this is what I have been doing. It's also in my last 8 years of experience. It was to say that from the global level, I'm really working on standardized on template and also modular content, which means that everything is produced on the global level. So locally, I actually did also the translation. So locally, they also got the translation and they did a kind of local adaptation, which means that you're sure that the go-to-market modeling is really going quickly, because they can just, translate, checking the translation and so on, how's it working and how do I get it approved. And I think also modular content is much easier to get approved because it's shorter. Instead of having a slide kit that is like 30 pages or something like that, you have something which is much shorter, so you can get it approved and you can get it out quickly. As you say, that there is a consistency and you also have the frequency, so you can really frequent have those messages coming out. So definitely I think also from my experience is that we have been working as well, for example, when it comes to Viva approved email, to have it standardized to every country is working on the same, but it's also to have to go to model it for sure. Budget impact locally, they have everything in the hands and so on. So just need to check, when it comes to translations, that it fit and regulatory, what are the pieces I need to go in, but at least that, they can really quickly have it out as well. So I think that there is a budget impact as well. That, this is also how I sell it to affiliate, to say that, do some of the tactics which has very high impact, which is a deep engagement locally, while I'm really doing all the rest of the things that you need to be produced. So you can just, focus really on the kind of other things as well. So and definitely.
Did you meet any resistance from the affiliate? Because they have their habits and they're used to dealing with certain agencies for content and they don't want to change, what's always been done. How did you go around that?
So I think we have been putting in place as well this digital forum to have those people in place and say, what, we need to change, because launches is always different than if you have a product, mature product on the market. And I think it's the same that, we took those patients, those people into this digital team to really make sure as well that whenever we are producing content and so on, we have the buy-in directly. So you need to have the affiliate as well on board very early in the process. So, and they are doing the buy-in, and they see the benefit as well to get, they get everything in their hands, and they just need to check the translation and so on. So it saves time and money for everyone.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So now we're moving to the last question, which is really about the lessons you've learned from this experience, and whether in hindsight you might do some of the elements of the campaign differently because you've learned to be more effective, more swift in the rolling out of these omni-channel campaigns. So tell us a bit about that.
I think that there is a lot of learnings actually to be done and so on, that, you don't do the change management over the night. I think that, one of the key learnings is it takes time. So we had to do it in 6 months, which is very quick and so on, to kind of push people as well. I would expect more or less 1 year, to be honest, to do the change management. I think also very often you think, okay, this is tactics. You go for tactics. What is the kind of tactical plan you need to do? But you need to say, what do I actually want to say for the editorial planning? And then you can see this message I want to pass out. Is it more into this tactic or this tactic? So you do the kind of way around that, you think about what we want to say from the global perspective, what we want to say on the medical, commercial, and patient perspective. And then you're checking what are the different tactics that you actually do. So I think that, rethink a little bit the setting of it. I think getting people for sure on board earlier to kind of have those, and also whenever you want to use pilots in the countries, we did pilots as well in some of the countries, and you need to have.
How did that go? What came out of the pilots?
So I mean, it went well. I mean, so we took some key countries as well where we were testing some pilots. So I think that, from launches and so on, you have some of the countries that are early launches like Germany and so on, which is a great market to test on. And I think as well that everyone's saying it, but in Germany, they don't go for digital and so on. Wireless, we get some data from, yes, and it's not actually true because they use a lot of digital. They are connected. So you can do it. So even if they also like some kind of traditional papers and so on, they like a lot of digital as well. So I think that we need to rethink it. And I was pulling out a lot of data as well from the benchmark to have an understanding to say that this is what I hear from the country, but what is the actually situation? And how can I come, how can I kind of build that in? But sitting with the countries and really follow up and make sure it works. So I think that definitely bring people on earlier, make sure that you have the time to do this change management. 6 times is very short. Normally a year would be good. And also make sure you have top management on board that are supporting the project, because otherwise it's just a kind of tactic, while it should be part of the strategy.
Okay, so really it's a lot of pieces of the jigsaw to align to be able to roll this out. But obviously you've been doing this for quite a number of years, and I'm always excited to hear people who do textbook omni-channel rollout like you have done, because everybody's talking about it at events, and very few people are actually implementing the tactics that you've done. And that's because there's too much resistance internally, or change management, as you said, take a lot longer than people think. So there's a lot to be said about maybe being in a relatively mid-sized organization to be able to move the dial and change the habits, certainly. But presumably you have received feedback, or you've done some debrief post-launch. I mean, what sort of feedback have you received from people involved that have changed their habits and changed the way they do business?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, over the time when we started and so on, I mean, and now it has been a huge difference as well, that, people are, but I think also it's the way of working with the countries as well, which is important to make sure that they are doing their local plan as well. So whatever is produced on the global level, to make sure that they have the local plans as well, was going to be impactful. It might be slightly diverse that, within the different tactics that they are actually selecting. For example, we know when you do some webinars, locally in local language, it will have a much more higher impact than if you actually do it from the global perspective, unless you're using top KOLs that really doing a very interesting topic. But otherwise, locally, for some of the countries that really want to have it in the local language. So I think that you need to understand that some of the pieces will have a little bit less impact from the global, but much more impact on the local level. So yeah, I think that, you need to bring them on the journey to make sure that they support the project.
Yeah, so it brings you right down to the basic principle of communication, whereby you adapt your message to your audience. So local
Yes.
languages in Europe really do matter. I mean, this is really something that stands out. So that brings me on to a first question from the audience here, which you've partially answered. Is how long in advance should you plan your omnichannel activities? And you mentioned you only had 6 months most of the
Yes.
time. But in an ideal world, how much time would you like to have?
So I would actually say that this depends on the maturity of the omnichannel approach of the company. I think that some of them are much more advanced. Some of them has a long journey to do. So I would say it depends a little bit on the company. I think that from one of my experience, the company was much more involved when it comes to omnichannel. It was easier to tweak it around in a couple of months. Some of them have less maturity, and in that case, I would say a year. So I think that what is your starting point? It's always, where do you start actually, and what are the changes you want to do? And I think that if you start far away, you need to have also some midterm. What are you actually looking for? Midterm visions and long-term visions, because you cannot expect to be completely omni-channel overnight. It just don't happen. So I think that set up those kind of step-by-step goals that, what you want to achieve within 3 months, what you want to achieve in 6 months, what you want to achieve in 1 year, and then go along. Otherwise, you will have a lot of disappointment, but you will also have people saying, you see, it didn't work. So we just stick in the old-fashioned way.
So I really like what I hear when you say you want things done in stages and in manageable steps. This brings me back to the topic of this webinar about, what to prioritize when creating multi-channel campaigns. So if you had to choose from only 3 channels, which one would you prioritize in absolute, as a starting point before you expand?
Before I expand, I think that, there is a stop shop hub that you need to have, that you actually post all the content and so on. And I think as well, beside everything is done by Salesforce, you need to have Viva approved emails to make sure whenever there have been visits and so on with the sales rep, you need to have a follow-up email afterwards. But I will also use webinars, because webinars will allow you to have in between the congresses, because whatever you have congresses, are they going to be once a month, or is there going to be 2 times a year? You have the opportunity to communicate and disseminate new data. And this is excellent as well when you have, and also for product launches, it's great as well to have some patient cases in webinars. So I would say a combination between that, you have the stop hub that you're going to have Viva approved emails. You can really make sure as well that you do all the invitation as well, and webinars. I think that these are high, deep engagement.
So the basic building blocks of your campaign, essentially.
As long as they're connecting together, I think that, and then if you can to expand, but I think that this is if you can to expand also, that you do some disease awareness on third-party media and also social media as well. And I went on a channel as well where I was using GMed, and they had a special channel as well dedicated into this therapeutic area. So you can also communicate, on your dissemination of your data on this webpage. But that is from a global perspective a little bit, but you're going to have a deep engagement on the special target group. But I would definitely say those kind of key, as long as they are connected and you have the impact as well collected in the CRM system.
Okay, so I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Madelene, for your insights and really, really interesting sharing of experience. I believe people can contact you directly on LinkedIn if needs be.
Sure.
And we look forward to the next webinar in a month's time, where we would like you to register. They'll be promoted through LinkedIn, but essentially we will talk about how to develop a crystal clear message, which very much aligns with your teaching on the omnichannel. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.